So to give you a brief introduction about Futurely, Futurely is an initiative that was born during these turbulent times with a mission to make advanced architecture and design education accessible to the world. So this is our first online immersive based workshop where we get together from all walks of life, and we have some interesting people with interesting backgrounds who developed incredible projects. And please take a note that the work produced was all curated and created in the past 5 to 6 days, with 3 to 4 days of tutorials and 2 days to craft the project. And as a part of our amazing review panel, we have Alexandra, Benjamin, and Sean, also known as iHeartBlob, which is an award-winning mixed reality design studio and a research collective with a strong focus on architectural object and roles of emerging technologies with architecture. So the studio has exhibited various provocative proposals across the globe at Storefront Art and Architecture in New York, A+D Museum Los Angeles, and many other interesting platforms. So they've also constructed mixed reality works, which are physical and digital pavilions for Toronto Winter Stations and Magazine Gallery at Vienna. And then we have Zubin Jamil, who is an architect and graphic designer with interests in practice pedagogy and speculative research. So he holds 2 master's degrees, one in advanced architecture from the Städelschule in Frankfurt, Germany, followed by a master's in architectural theory and pedagogy at SCI-Arc in Los Angeles. Subsequently, he has tutored at SCI-Arc as a part of David Drew's Cyborg Misprison Studio and few others, including eminent architects such as Dwayne Euler and Jenny Wu. And finally, we have Joris Putiniers, who is a speculative architect and computational researcher from Ghent. He currently runs an independent studio where he specializes in data-driven design and digital fabrication. He worked and he taught at Bartlett UCL and Texas A&M and contributed on projects for MoMA New York and London Design Festival. We really appreciate your presence with us in such a short notice, and we're indeed super excited to have you guys here. So I, Vamsi, and Arik, along with our friend Alex, we've put together the 7 days of workshop, and I hope it's pretty exciting for all of you as well. We can get started, and with just one last point before that, a special shout out to our incredible team who has been working round the clock and collaborated online to produce the amazing projects that you're about to see. Great.
Stefana, Zapuc, maybe you guys want to go? I think you guys can go.
Yeah.
Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, let's start with you guys then.
Hello, guys.
Hi.
And
nice to have you.
Just a second, please, everyone just open your files and be ready for any minute, right? Don't wait for us to
we can
your
hear
names. Yeah. All right, Stefana.
Yeah.
And Teddy, the stage is yours, guys.
Yes.
All right.
My lessons done.
I'm taking care of the admissions, Eric.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay. Hi, so we're Stefana and Teddy, and our project is called Mirrored Mutations.
Next.
So our concept for the brief development was the idea of kind of the distorted mirror of the city. And our main inspirations were the project Met Architects did in Paris and Mark Foster's Gauge Guggenheim. So the idea was kind of breaking this concept of static workspaces and creating this dynamic and fluid facade that would take elements or monuments of the city and deconstruct them. And this continuous update of the deconstruction of the existing urban elements would mirror into the facade of our proposal. So as a case study, we were looking at Venice and we're taking a few urban elements, and the main approach was kind of working in ZBrush and keeping this maybe like gradient or blur, so still preserving a part that resembles the existing and then kind of distorting it or mutating it until it becomes something completely different. So we repeated this process. Yeah, so here it shows kind of the process we went through. So the steps we took working in ZBrush from this cathedral dome to the final element.
So also we didn't take only elements that they are seen, but elements that they are culturally known. So here we can see the old camera where we can see it all over Venice. And then also if we see in the next, we always tend to show the, no, also in the next one. Yeah, we always tend to show this wavy effect because we needed to implement the idea of the flood in Venice and how it can affect all of those elements that we already have. So how they will deconstruct these elements from already existing scenario or pandemic. So, yep.
So after we created this catalog of mutated or distorted elements, we started playing around with the geometries, creating this kit bash, and this is the resulting space, the two main facades. And then in the following pages, we're going to see the virtual space we're proposing, how it looks on the exterior and the interior spaces. So the main spaces, the main idea is having this main hall, which kind of resembles a cathedral. And this would be the communal working space or like the meeting room. And we wanted also to integrate the idea of double function. So kind of blurring the boundaries between private working spaces. And since you would be in a public square, kind of having this interface between public and private and allowing different experiences or different events to take place here. So we're thinking of maybe like at specific times, this could also become a concert hall or be used in recreational ways throughout the working day.
Mainly, that's it. Thanks to Arek and Bamsi, of course, we had this amazing results for us at least. Thank you, Kuba.
I think Arek is.
You can clap or thumbs up to the reactions, guys. Yeah. Yes.
So basically, I'm just gonna share my screen again with the exe file to walk in it while our jurors can critique it.
Yep.
Right, guys?
Are you guys familiar with the works of William Bateson? He's like I think he's a biologist who studied the relationship between these mutations and symmetries, and he discovered that. Oh, sorry.
Joris, you can go on. Yeah.
Yes. And he discovered that the lack of information results in a symmetry. So I think he did the investigations with I think it was a human hand or something. And on places where information was lacking, it just created like this symmetrical fold of itself. So it was like a double hand. I thought it was quite interesting. I do like your overview, the schematics. I guess it's when there is this transformation between what is Venice or it's like a very controlled versus uncontrolled discussion we can have, I guess.
Can I say something?
Of course, guys. Just go ahead.
Thank you, Stefana and Teddy. It was a really cool project, and I really enjoyed the concept. I think first of all, kind of bringing the urban elements into the virtual space. I think that's quite important, especially right now when we do have to focus a lot on designing the virtual space, and it's really nice to bring these familiar urban elements into these new digital spaces. So it is made for people to be used. So it is important to have some sort of history and precedence. And I do really like how you use these also architectural techniques like arrays, symmetries, and with these existing elements. I think that's gave you quite a impressive result, even though it's kind of like a one-room kind of project, which is I guess that's the purpose for the virtual digital space. Yeah, I think it's an impressive result, especially this 1 week workshop. I think you did a really great job. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For me, what's interesting are some of the spaces that you can read the historical reference a little bit more in, because I don't know if for you what you find to be the better spaces, even just formally within this structure versus none. Because to me, there's an essay by Colin Rowe about literal and phenomenal transparency. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the phenomenal transparency is about being able to understand, kind of intellectually understand the space from the form there. And I think there are moments where the transformations that you've made in ZBrush, for example, or with the architectural techniques that Sasha mentioned, that's quite apparent. So what is a very abstract object or part of an abstract object still has an understanding for me in terms of maybe its composition or even its historical precedent. But then there are other moments in the structure that maybe got transformed so many times that to me they've lost some of their referentiality and are just standalone sculptures, and some of them are very nice as well. But for me, the more interesting ones are where you can really read that concept in it. So I don't know if you feel the same way about your project, but that would be my interpretation, that I would take those moments and I would try to really build those moments up a little bit more, and even maybe try to embed them with some of the meaning behind their original precedent, you know, whether it's a compositional meaning or something more.
Thank you for your
Thank
comment.
you. Yeah, we agree. Like when we were presenting and even when we're having reviews, like we mentioned for the main roof element, which was the one, like that approach kind of like preserving and having this gradient from preserving the element itself and then kind of mutating it. I think, yeah, that was our main approach.
Yeah, I think that element worked really, really well. Whereas there are other times that maybe and I know you're trying to do a whole range of different formal experimentation within one structure, but just, I imagine that in a 1 week workshop, you can really build your skill set, and you can also then look back at this project that you do very quickly and see which parts of it you find successful and which parts of it you would like to build on more, and use from not only from a tooling and a technical way, but also even from kind of a conceptual and spatial way.
Yeah, just to add to that comment, I think there's a lot of sophistication with the way you've modeled the form, and I'd like some more clarity on how you curated these different objects for you to then hybridize. It's interesting to me that you picked the church as a reference point, and you can see a lot of the features of the church in your final project as well. One, yes, you have this church-like atrium space in between, but it's interesting how you've maintained the porche space that you see of the church with these thick walls, and you've sort of still maintained that porche space and used your hybridized objects within it. But at the same time, on the exterior, you can see some sort of hints of circulation in the way you've placed your objects. It would have been interesting to see if you could further hybridize the porche by moving away from a direct 1:1 translation of the church by just replacing the porche with your hybridized objects. If it could somehow be more transparent, if you could break that geometry, I think that 1:1 connection you could sort of fragment it a little bit more. It would have been a lot more interesting, because it's always a very interesting exercise when you sort of do this kit bashing technique where you have a precedent and you find another object and you have to find new ways of replacing old signifiers rather than directly replacing it with a transformed object, by sort of changing its function and changing the performative aspect of the original itself. So it'll be one step further, that would be an exercise to sort of take that signifier and take it one step further rather than just replacing it.
Very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It can push our thoughts in a way much wider and architectural way, whatever you just mentioned and before you. So thank you for clarifying these ideas.
By the way, recently Stefana and Teddy just graduated from IAC like 2 days ago. So this whole workshop for them has been a very new experience, I guess, like going from computational to directly manual modeling a lot and less data. But I hope it wasn't too much.
It was.
All right. Should we move to the others? Let's go. Try to share it.
Yeah. So my name is Kuba, and I did this project with Loki. And we would like to put you a little bit in our position, how it all started, by like a little introduction. Our relationship with work has been changing throughout history. In the 20th century, with the development of industry and shaking the position of faith, work in many ways has replaced religion as something that defines and classifies people. The digital revolution has put masses behind the computers, where a common man can make a living working from 9 to 5 in a dull and depressing environment, only to really enjoy the time between the shifts. With the time of post-digital, these days are over. Technological advancements allow us to work without borders, with digital screens displays like holograms in front of our very faces. It is time to take the next step, making the most of our days at work, not only in terms of quantity, but also in terms of quality. So here is where Virtualaya steps in, something that we titled the Deep Work Temple. The project showcases a place that stimulates a constant deep work state with relaxing and revitalizing spaces. The workspace of the future is a temple in which every user can get in touch with their work and inner selves, spending their work days in peace and pleasure. Augmented reality interface guides you through the intriguing sequence of spaces, including gardens, pools, saunas, and meditation areas, and allows you to playfully do your work no matter where you are. Deep Work Temple blends physical and digital, and mystique with cutting-edge tech. And I think what will work best if after this introduction, we would like just to put you in it without me adding any additional information, and let you experience the temple on your own. Is it also sharing sound? That would be really nice.
Yeah, it's sharing.
Yeah, can you hear the sound?
Yes, Kuba.
Yeah, we can hear the sound.
what we wanted to achieve is this overlay of a more traditional, tactile, raw, orthogonal structure that in our idea is like a Rubik's cube that changes every day and is infiltrated, is penetrated by this augmented reality layers that guide the users through the space, helping them to orientate in this maze. So you can experience layers of augmented reality, some of them being shared by all the users, like the big waves we can see, but also personal layers that are just surrounding particular users. And we have different kind of spaces. You could see the pool, the forest. Now we are in the big plaza.
I'll just go to the forest.
Heading towards the forest. That can give you a completely different experience than the other ones. And
I guess maybe I can start. I just have one question to begin with. So, is the space that we're looking at physical with augmented content, or is it virtual with augmented content on top of the virtual?
In our story, we wanted to emphasize more the importance of augmented reality as the future of our work, not something that completely disconnects us like VR, but rather the overlay. So it sometimes still questions the rules of gravity, but in principle, yeah, we see a clash of physical and digital.
I was asking because I think it's interesting the way that quite a lot of the spaces look like they're not designed for human beings being 1.8 meters high or whatever, but rather for like smaller entities. So if it's a virtual space, then there's something interesting about the way that Arek's moving around right now, which is more akin with like flying. Or when we were watching the video, it felt like the rooms were incredibly small for human perspective. No, and I'm not saying that as a negative. I'm saying it actually as I guess like a somewhat alternative positive, in the fact that most transitions from the physical space to virtual space is through like a first person controller. So you transition or you transpose the current human body, the physical body that we all have, and transpose that into the virtual. And I think there's something quite interesting about rethinking what that mediation should be. There's a lot of, I guess, for virtual reality, the concern that I think makes it somewhat less exciting is the notion that we are just transposing our physical body to something virtual, but rather we have the complete flexibility to change what our bodies are like. So in virtual space, we could also be a giant or we can be an ant. So maybe like a game that I think would be super interesting to look at if you guys are thinking along those lines. I think it's called Everything. And it basically, you can become everything in the world, from like a bear to a tree to an ant to like a particle. And it's this super interesting discussion about scale and how we actually perceive ourselves. And I kind of got that feeling when we were moving through like these like tunnels and things. I thought that was kind of cool.
I think you bring a very interesting point, and I really agree with you. The reason why we still use certain language and it feels like it could be a physical space is to give certain kind of point of reference still. You know, like you talked about the size of a bee and a bear. This is a bit how we do it with space, that you still can recognize, for example, that it's too small.
Yeah. But I think that's quite interesting. Sorry?
the changing scale up aspect, I think it's a very interesting, and yeah, thank you for that.
I just have a small comment about like the spatial quality. I think it's a really great idea to you have this concept.
Thank you.
The Rubik's Cube, and it's quite important for the working space. And especially, I think the only critique would be that at times they looked quite dark and more looking like a kind of underground club rather than a working space. So maybe if you're interested in these augmented reality and spaces, maybe you can think about in future projects how you can change and alternate real physical spaces with AR. Maybe people can customize the colors, or maybe it's not all dark, maybe you can put your own lights and stuff like this. I guess it would look more customized.
Yeah, great idea.
But really
cool.
I also very quickly want to show you an alternative version of this project when we go all white mode, and still looks it's pretty light this way too.
That's cool too.
Yeah.
I think the augmented content is super interesting as well, though. But originally I thought that you had a whole virtual space that also had augmented content, and I thought that was super interesting. That because it basically puts virtual spaces on the same level playing field as physical spaces. Because right now, I guess quite a lot of our discussions is this notion that our physical space, we don't want to remove it. So we've also spoke about this idea that virtual reality separates us from the physical space. But when we think that the virtual space is just as equally important, then there's also the possibility to have augmented content in the virtual world as well, which is something quite interesting. Yeah, exactly, at like another level.
Right.
Yeah. To add to that, initially when I saw your presentation, I don't know, I think it's because of how you treated the surfaces and the form. I thought it was a completely virtual space. And if you sort of go in that direction, I think your project has immense potential, because it's very current, because we have to sort of reevaluate what workspaces are like. And we could learn a lot from digital ecosystems that already exist. I mean, why does a workspace just need to be a space where you go work and then you go back home? If you look at platforms like Twitch, for example, it is a workspace. Like, we as teachers, you know, we are sort of playing dual roles now. We are like, Twitch streamers now. That's how we produce content. That's how we talk about, design. So you have to sort of, I think, rethink what is the new digital infrastructure for a workspace. Why does it just have to be a workspace? It should include ideas. You should sort of spatialize digital content. It could include ideas of recreation. It should include ideas of retail. It should include ideas of hospitality. So that is not just a space for social interaction, but it could also be a space for social collaboration, where you have users who sort of witness you working or going through your daily activity on this virtual space that you've created, and you can perhaps even brand it and monetize it as such, just like how a Twitch streamer does. Yeah. I think it is you will see a emergence of such spaces now, because all of us are so engaged online and we're all on digital spaces. What we once thought to be activities which you solely use in brick and mortar spaces. So there's a lot of things to sort of reevaluate and reinforce. And I think it would be pertinent to sort of build an ecosystem which includes other ideas of recreation and retail within your workspace as well.
Yeah.
And what you've done is sort of perfect for that. It has these, embedded sort of subcultures, which caters to specific communities and audiences built within. And because if you sort of take that further ahead in your virtual space, you can keep sort of building up on that, and it's easily malleable and can sort of include more and more audiences based on reactions to what you're sort of doing in the workspace. I think that's something you should, I mean, everybody should sort of look into thinking of what digital workspaces mean. It's not just as a space for remote working, but also as a space for remote collaboration and remote engagement, much more than anything.
Yeah, very, very true.
Fine. One thing I would love to add is that you have all of these hidden spaces in your model that you can only get to by flying through objects, like collision. That would make only more sense that this is a VR space and not a built space.
No,
yeah,
of
I agree
course.
to that too.
What I meant is more that it's clearly relates to something physical and refers to something that we know from reality. But of course, it's still a virtual experience, and it's impossible to go through it if it's an actual building. So no, of course it is VR.
All right. I convinced you then. Okay.
I mean, that's just the aesthetics of the new workplace. You're just allowed to go through walls.
Yeah, right.
More privacy.
All right. Does
Guys,
anybody want to add anything, or should we move to the next group?
Just a moment. I'd like to also announce that we have Saina Mostawafi, who is an architect and researcher based in TU Delft, and he's also the director of DARS Studio in DIA Dessau. He's also a part of the conversation right now.
Welcome.
Thanks for
Yes.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. So Niloufar and Mohammad want to go next.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad that we had this chance to have you all to critique our work. And thanks, Sina, for being with us, like always. Thanks, Eric and Ramsey. And okay, let's start with our project. We are a team of two Iranians, me, Niloufar, and Mohammad Hosein. And since we had this basically same culture, we came up with a project that was mostly creating a fictional ambient atmosphere to tell an ancient story and create an extension to this. To start, I will tell you the story of the space that we created. The aim of this project was a representation of a broken palace and the recreation of its elements to heterotopic ambiances. The palace belonged to a king in an ancient Persian fiction so-called Seven Figures. In this fiction, the king sent for 7 princes as his brides and built a palace containing 7 domes for his 7 brides, each dedicated to one day of the week, governed by the days, planet, and bearing the symbolic colors. After the construction, architect of the palace tells him that I created the most beautiful architecture in the world for you, but I put a break in the building that if it's moved, the building will be destroyed. So the king ordered the architect to be killed so that no one knows where the break is. The story of this project starts from the day when a worker finds the brick and the palace collapses its 7 domes, turns into 1,000 pieces. Each piece becomes a hub for a craftsman to create and live. With the fall of the palace, the operation and hierarchy will be destroyed, but some of
the narrator's poem will still remain in its elements to be found. So for starting the creation of the whole project, we started with two of the most famous and basically known architecture from our culture, Soleimani Dome in Iran, and basically Nasirul Mulk Mosque in Shiraz. For the first one, we try to collapse its elements and get some chunks of its elements based on a grid. And in the second one, because it is mostly famous because of its pink ceramics, we try to create our chunks based on the ceramics patterns, and we destroyed and we recreate based on these elements, as you can see. So now, after we gathered all these elements together, we try to basically create the hub, the craft hub that we were thinking about in this post-dystopian basically atmosphere, and create a utopia maybe basically afterwards. And this is our results. We try to map the pink colors and the blue colors of the most famous basically ceramic patterns of its own elements of each one of these buildings. And then this is how we created these virtual spaces. And yeah, that's the renders and some of the documentation that we prepared for the story. And also Mohammad was working on his thesis based on a theory called clash theory. He might want to add some of his research and his point of view to this building and to our creation. Mohammad, please start.
Hello all. Thanks to Vamsi and Eric. We have a great journey during this week. And I'm going to talk about about my thesis and what's interesting about it. Actually, it's all about clash theory. Clash theory is that there is no certain thing in it, and it's so interesting. Just imagine two cars having an accident. In the moment of the collision, there is no control over the next shape of the cars. That moment can be known as the moment of beauty. You can do the same with two buildings with all their cultural and historical events within. Just imagine you can do this with time and make this question. How will the space look like if two spaces from different time get next to each other? That's so interesting, and that's something that we try to experience in these two buildings, which is Niloufar said before. Masjid Nasirul Mulk Mosque and Soleimani Dome. We try to collide these two buildings together and see what happened to their unique spaces and make some unique spaces within them. And I guess that was something worthy of spending some time on it.
And we have a video, basically, a short video. If
I can probably walk through the model.
Okay, you don't want to. Okay, yeah, because basically the narration was mostly on the video.
Yeah.
Not,
All right, let's go, guys.
Yeah, maybe I don't know. Like maybe it's better to see it.
Eric, I assume now that a bit of space came to the table, you can go to the Excel file also.
I really like your project. I think it's compositionally it's really nice, and I think the idea that you destroyed the hierarchy, which I think you said is one of the goals you set out to do in this, is super powerful and evident right from the beginning. So I think it's a great project, and I think it's incredible in the short time that you've done it this way. I think what would be very, very interesting, and I understand that in a 1-week workshop, this is probably not possible, but if you would be interested to take this on further, is to see how this would change, or how you could really keep this concept as you make it a bit more realistic, as you, for example, consider how this meets the ground. And as you consider what are the walkable spaces. Because, for example, I felt that the first time I saw the video, when the people were added, it lost a little bit something for me, because it felt that you had this amazing object and you just put the people on it then, where you could find a flat surface. And I think that sorting out those details, because you have such an amazing base to start from, that is both sort of formally, spatially, and conceptually strong. I think working through the details of making this a more functional architecture would make it into a very, very powerful project. So I think it would be worth to continue it somehow and try to make it into a project that, that can be shown in that way. And even, I guess, these new tools that you've learned probably would be a pretty interesting way of doing that, because you could actually at scale move through your project, understand the spaces that are not accessible, and try to use this new skill set or this new tool set as a way of designing. And so I think that would be very, very interesting.
Actually, there is a few architects in Iran who are trying to examine this method.
Thank you, Eric.
Why?
No, Mohammad was trying to talk, Eric. You're muted, by the way.
Mohammad, please go ahead.
Sorry.
My bad.
Actually, there is an architect. Yeah, actually, there is an architect who is trying this method, Mehrdad Iravanian. I don't know if you know him or not. He won some Aga Khan awards about 20 years ago in Shiraz, and he has some projects in this method. But his projects are somehow realistic. I suggest you to visit Tarpud Museum in Shiraz. Its images are accessible via internet.
Yeah, my only suggestion is this project more in that vein. I think that it has so much potential that it's in some way a waste to leave it at this stage. But it's not even a criticism of where you're at. I think in the time you have, this is a
I mean, I enjoy this method better than what traditionally or contemporary architects in Iran are trying to do. I would love it more because it's completely free of all the limitation and everything. And that's what we get from Vamsi and Eric during this workshop, to think free. That was what we got.
I like the fact that you used mosques as your sample set, and how you sort of deconstructed them. And with your new composition, although you still maintain traces of the mosque, I don't read it as a building anymore. It seems to be more like an urban condition, because you have a lot of interesting spatial conditions. You seem to have larger plazas. There are some spaces which are really compressed and more intimate. So I think, like Ben said, now that you're armed with these new techniques and tools, should further explore and continue making sense out of this project spatially, and like he said, with the ground. Because initially, even though there wasn't a ground, I thought the bottom part of your project was subterranean, just because of the way the people were standing at one level, everything else was underground. So perhaps this could be, you could take this project and figure out a way to talk about this in terms of an urban condition. I think there's enough potential for that there. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting to see basically how any material idea, which I assume, like I was also following the previous presentation, so the way I can read it, this workshop is also about very much about VR and this immaterial space that we can create, and how this immaterial space can basically provide new solutions, architectural solutions. But back to the projects, what I can read from it, I can see that this project is about a kind of the aesthetic of an incomplete, basically. It's also about like the aesthetic of immaterial to a certain extent. So I think in this extent, I also like the project, and I see a lot of potential to build on top of this. And reading from what Mohammad was referring to, and also the way you were explaining the process, so I see that also this project is also very much about breeding, or basically colliding or clashing or integrating two systems together.
Yeah.
So when it comes to this, aspect of the, let's say, design process, maybe it would be interesting, which also goes maybe with what in line with what Ben was referring to in terms of materialization, and then bringing this virtual to real. Might be the way. Might be, for instance, now you're breeding two different buildings, but you're breeding two similar scales, and then you're breeding typologies with typologies, right? So the materials that you're combining or clashing or crashing with each other are at the same scale. While, for instance, if we could, for instance, breed what we can know and refer to ornament or tectonic, and combining with what we refer as typology or typomorphology, I think this breeding or this clash would be probably more fruitful in terms of getting something which is more close to, let's say, which is more materialized in a way. So I think the references that you are putting together are both at the same scale. Maybe the next step for this process is to breed or bring two systems together that are not necessarily in similar scales, and this may result into something which is more basically integrated. I think as a next step that can be really interesting. Another thing which might also be interesting is to breeding different cultures, I would say, right? So now you're breeding two instances which are all coming from one land, but I think it would be interesting to also breed different ingredients coming from different cultures, because probably this would be the first time in digital future that we may refer to Gideon, but I'm sure that many of the audience know Gideon. He's one of the writers of modern architecture history. Basically, he has this sentence in his book. He's saying he's referring to eclecticism, basically, which refers to like combining different paradigms together. And it is a very interesting quote. I mean, obviously the book is old, but it also shows the modernistic way of thinking about the theory and history of architecture, it says if eclecticism is a paradigm, I'm also okay to be a thief, right? Which means that like if it is okay to bring things together and combine them and compose them, I feel comfortable to basically collage things together and come up with a new solution. I think this sentence shows the paradigm of that era, but I think in today's world, this breeding of different cultures can definitely result into interesting solutions rather than us staying in maybe one land to make this breed. So maybe another step to based on this methodology is to breed different concepts and different lands together. Yeah, after all, I would also like to congratulate you. I think there's a lot of architectural potential and capacity that we can build on top of.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have some.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sina.
Yeah. I was very interested in your crash theory. If I understand correctly, it is something beautiful that is emerged from an uncontrolled moment or a chaotic moment. The parts or the discrete pieces seem to be very much curated or well curated in the sense that makes sense for the viewer. Maybe it's not the right question to ask now, but maybe a simulation software would also do the trick. But yeah, no, really nice work, guys. Congratulations.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Guys, we have Sovona, Mouad, and Stefhy next. Are you guys ready? Can you come on board?
Yeah. Vamsi, I've got to jump off the call,
Yes,
so
yes.
I want to say thanks to everyone for the really nice work, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Sean and Alexandra about the other projects a bit later. But thanks for having me, and really impressive stuff.
Thanks, Ben, for stepping by.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys, I also have to jump off, but Sean will stay and tell us more what he's gonna see. So really exciting. It's amazing results for a 7-day workshop. We know how hard it can be, the ZBrush and heavy geometries, but I mean, it's amazing what you achieved. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sasha.
Thank you, Sasha.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I would also like to say the same. We just finished our Digital Future workshop, so
oh yes.
Painting. So thanks for having me, and I would definitely follow the other results in your page.
Thank you, Sina. It's a pleasure to have you here. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yes. Bye.
Shall we begin?
Yes.
Do you want to share?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm just gonna ask you to leave the videos to me, or
Yeah. Sure.
yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Can you see my screen, guys?
Yeah.
So hi everyone, I'm Sovona and my group members are Mouad and Stefhy. And I would like to first begin with thanking everyone, all of you who are here and our amazing tutors, Vamsi and Eric. And yeah, without further delay, I'll just start with the narrative. So as we sink in the world of virtual reality, a limitless canvas of possibilities, we are standing at the edge of a new world, and the question becomes, how do we respond to this? With the current situation of global pandemic, the ground beneath us is shifting, or perhaps disappearing in a way, as we are stuck in our private spaces while the world is reconsidering aspects like educational institutions, offices, marketplaces, or museums, etc. Another question that is worth considering is the nature of our workspaces. We spend a huge chunk of our day in our workspaces, and somehow we add values to our lives, to the world we are living in. And the question is, can our workspaces add values to our lives too? just for a reference, guys, so this is Museum of Digital Arts in Zurich, and it was forced to close its door due to the lack of funding. And I think it would be safe to say that the non-profit projects like this will continue to get affected due to the projected global economic crash. And the question now becomes is that should the art suffer in a way? And this particular case or this particular situation sort of it inspired our project called Sunergos. For those of us who aren't aware of this term, Sunergos is a Greek word which means to work together or to create together. It is a virtual co-working and exhibiting space for the artists from different streams. The space attempts to encourage cross-disciplinary interactions and aims to unleash the full potential of one's creative process. Just a turntable animation. 1 second. Yeah. The complex morphology of Sunergos and its space is open for different interpretations. For instance, an artist can find his own particular niche between the thread-like structures or ambiguous corners and transform that particular space into his virtual art studio. In this way, Sunergos attempts to be the ever-growing or ever-changing structure. Yeah, and basically it's a place to collaborate, interact, co-create, and inspire each other. And yeah, Mohammad, will you like to go forward?
Mouad. Okay, Sunergos, a space for you to do anything at any given time. A facility that unleashes one's creative potential, breaking the code of the museological experience. Imagine if you could twist and tweak any creation, any piece of art, then showcase your own iterations in an open catalog for everyone. Chill by the synergy bubble, immersed in the most zen vibes, then go back for a work meeting on the clouds. Just like that. Well, Sunergos has just made that possible, giving you the opportunity to customize your working experience on a regular, helping you create your ideal workspace. If you need anything, just ask for a guide to bring a solution island for you, redefining what Mondays used as rigor in your subconscious mind. It took us some working hours to come up with this. Imagine what we could do if we all work on it together. And so now we're just showing some night renders.
Yeah, I think that's it.
And then image showcasing the island with the guides. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'll go. First of all, I think it's I commend you for the, how deeply that you've thought of what a workspace ought to be beyond just the formal aspect of it. I think it's really impressive that how you, outline some of the more political questions surrounding the workspace today, and the survival of, like, the example you use of the museum which had shut down, and what does it mean to sort of reinvigorate this notion of space and sort of continue that work forward. I think I sort of mentioned this earlier, but I think the internet has sort of done this to us. It sort of allows us and gives us the space to host a whole bunch of different audiences and different subgenres. And your project seems to be the perfect host for that, not just in terms of its function, but even in terms of form. It sort of reflects that that idea of the lifestyle as to how fragmented and detached it is from the structure as a whole. The fact that it doesn't even respond to gravity and it's sort of ephemerally floating in the air. So you're sort of already setting up a certain work culture, which is sort of step one. Have you thought of how somebody might sort of use this space? I mean, you've sort of set up the guidelines as to what might happen here, But is this again something completely virtual and people sort of log into this digitally and then go about their day-to-day activities? Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. We actually have envisioned this as a virtual space where, like, you log in, say, in an application, and then you're working in your, say, artworks or like your sculptures, but again, in a virtual space, we're doing that.
Right.
Maybe, yeah. So.
Right. So, yeah, in that sense, I think it is very successful because we have to sort of look at what are these trends that we want to sort of reinforce that we're so used to, but also reevaluate a lot of the things that doesn't really work well in the traditional sense. So I love the idea that you can, sort of remotely collaborate and directly engage with an existing idea and have iterations of the same all sort of happening in the same workspace. One thing which I think everybody could think of, because we are talking about digital workspaces and everybody sort of logs in and becomes a part of this community, is one's own identity on a digital platform. Because because online everybody sort of has an avatar, right? Or some sort of a consumable that you can wear. If you're into gaming, everybody has a different character. So that's one step that you can also think of how do you represent yourself as an identity while using the space. You can't just be a generic user. And think about how that could in fact help you sort of brand and monetize the space as it is, as a way to sort of keep this up and running, because you have to think of costs as well. I know I'm really pushing, sort of making you think a lot more deeper than what you might have thought in this 1 week. But identity, I think, is very important in the digital space, apart from the function that you're carrying out. Because in the physical space, fashion and yeah. Tell me.
Sorry, I don't want to. Okay. So, like, to add to your point, what like we were also thinking, say, like these ambiguous thread-like structures. What we were thinking was, like, say, if an artist habits that place and converts it into his own studio, for example, and imagine like populating this whole space with a lot of artists, and they come up with their own small spaces, and how this structure can be an ever-growing form in that way. And you know what I mean? Like, am I clear?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, so we were also thinking on those lines, but I think it's still a work in progress.
Sure. No, absolutely. I mean, this has so much potential. It sort of gives me a lot of ideas as to how, a workspace like this could work digitally. And I think you should absolutely continue working on it further and, developing a cohesive narrative as to how the whole thing could function. It's fantastic. I love it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Does anybody want to add anything? Sean? Joris?
Yeah, my microphone was muted. Maybe one thing to add, I really like it. I mean, physical architecture is confined by the formal and the functional, right? And when this shift happens to a digital workspace, the same happens there, but you can go into much farther extremes. And I really like that you guys just full on just like modify the formal in such a way that it almost becomes like a functional, that we are not confined by these physical limitations, so we can just build whatever we want. And that's what I really like about this project. And it really gives for some very nice imagery as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think just to add on from what yours just said, I think it's super interesting, this notion of there's a lot of stuff, the things that we can identify as walkable, quote unquote, architecture. is limited compared to, you see, the strands that start to wrap the architecture. And then your kind of question, or I was a little bit, was like, is this part of the art that already exists, or is this the architecture that is basically living, I guess, within this space? And I think I was thinking of like ways that I would actually navigate that space. And I think, again, to kind of, I guess, continue on from what I mentioned earlier on, it's super interesting to think of how you're using these spaces and how that actually interacts, or how people interact within these spaces. Is it through walking, flying, teleporting? There's all these different ways that are completely inaccessible in the physical world, but completely accessible for anything digital. So then it breeds new ways of thinking about things that maybe look redundant or so on in the physical world, but actually have a lot of nuance to their spatial conditions and actually enhance certain spaces because they become nooks or like hidden zones that you can only access by going through this depth of stuff. I guess I'm calling it stuff. But it's really great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One thing I'd love to add on this is, if you think about it, we're in the digital world. We have a lot less things to take care of, so to say, right? Like in terms of gravity and collisions of elements and a lot of things. And it makes you think sort of like, why is our digital version a very much more freed version of our real life? And if you go too deep and think like, if somebody designed our world, why did he or she put a lot of constraints in this world in the first place? So I don't know if we take VR to I don't know if it evolves too much. I don't know if at some point we're gonna have some kind of problems where we start introducing those kind of constraints to make it not completely free. Or are we just gonna keep recursively making it more and more free as we go?
On
I hope
one
I'm not
hand,
overthinking.
no, there are different challenges. Just to add to the point Derek mentioned, one thing is the sort of the physical boundaries that you want to set yourself, your social bubble. That's one of the key concerns, that you cannot really control much in VR, and now they're trying to see how to like create a bubble or an access frame within which you have your own space and someone does not come right on your face. And I think, just to name one, that's one of the concern, and there are multiple other concerns that are like soon to arise, and new challenges. Maybe they're not exactly similar to the real life challenges and the political or the economical challenges that we would face, but rather a new set of challenges that we probably need to see how those arise, and we need to be ready for it.
Also, one more thing, like if you think about physical phenomena as like, for example, let's say gravity, not as a physical phenomena or as something that was created as a story, like something that pulls you in. Like, how do you come up with an idea like that? And would you come up with something completely brand new in VR sometime later on when it's more evolved? Would you write rules that are completely different than our world right now? That would be super interesting if we can create like rules with its own physics that is somehow different, rather than being completely able to fly and things, right?
I think that's where video games are really successful, because each one has a specific rule set and we play with
exactly. And
those
in this workshop, we like, whenever we were gathering a lot of references, right, before we work, like, of course we had architecture references, but we also had a lot of game references so kind of architects are being like inspired so much from games, as much as from games as architecture and arts and other photography right now. And that's really exciting for me.
Yes.
All right, I guess next is Nilen. Haseeb won't make it with him, but Nilen and Haseeb did a project. Nilen, you wanna start sharing?
Okay, yeah. So like, you guys see the screen, right, Vamsi?
Yeah, we do see the screen.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, now I'll just show it like that. Okay, so yeah, so like before I start, I would just like to thank Eric and Vamsi, since this was my first experience and like first time I was just trying to experiment with VR and how like this spaces function. Before this, I was literally stuck with the practicality of architecture, and I was not really exposed to like to thinking beyond how the practical things work. So like this 1 week workshop like really gave me an idea of how to think beyond it, and I'm really glad to attend this workshop with them. And yeah, so just to start with the idea, so like this project was done by me, that is Nilen from, I'm based in India, and with my partner Haseeb, who is from Germany. He's not able to join since he has his master's thesis discussion with his professor. So yeah, so what I would like to start with is when I just was trying to go on with my concept for the project, I was more thinking regarding the fitness part of it. Like since I've been since I've been into fitness for quite some time, and it just like I realized it in this pandemic how the how experiencing a space and like how not being in the same space for a long time. Yeah, yeah. So like basically how if I just state a really simple example, how if you just try and work out in the same space and like so maybe even your own house for the last I guess 4 months we're stuck in this pandemic. I was just trying to explore how virtual experience can like maybe just try and freshen up your mind, and you can just go back to the normal life again. So I was just trying to create more of a virtual experience uh, with this project. So after trying to go around a lot of ideas of maybe just creating a virtual gyms and a lot of spaces like that, we finalized down to this concept where we thought of having virtual spaces where like where there can be a possibility to host virtual fights. And like I'll just go around with, yeah, so the ideology was to just try and visualize if there's a space in the virtual environment where people can like where people from all over the world can just come virtually connect and maybe fight or like even do any physical activity which takes them away from the space they have been locked inside for the past months. And like that's instead of having more indoor spaces, like how about just creating some experiences in the virtual world which just helps them like just freshen up for a while. And we just narrowed down to this concept of having a virtual fight place basically. And just for the referencing, we try to go around really this traditional Chinese temples for that matter, and like even this traditional forms from like which we initially derived like the form we have for the project. And like if you have seen the Black Mirror episode in season 5, where like the person just can have the virtual fight just by being anywhere in the world. And yeah, so like just creating an experience very similar to that. So like this was the form like which we had for the proposal, like which kind of like we just kind of tried and reimagined the relics. And if you see the form like just tapering towards the end, it looks like a modernized temple for me. And also we try to have various programs all over the building. So for instance, the main program like which we narrowed down to was like we could have multi-level arenas. And so like the project's ideology was like more about creating the outdoor experiences, since we are already inside locked down in this space since months. So it wasn't about creating a space inside, it was just about a really good experience with the space we create in the virtual world. And so just to go around with the with few of the views we had for the exterior. So this was the form which we got down to, and like you can see, like these were the decks created for the arenas where the fight could happen. This was more of a recreational zone, where people could just come and interact and just get away from the any for instance, I was just trying to me and my partner was just trying to figure out how just entering the virtual world can help them in any way possible. So just have any recreational space at the ground level, and these were we just tried and imagine the spaces to be like this, like the decks at multi levels. And since we were trying to depict the relics, so we also try to not go with the rules, and obviously tried and imagine how the virtual world can have its own elements with the zones. And this is how the form looked overall. So the ground level mostly had recreational zones, and towards the end we just thought of having some, so even in this space there could be some pods for maybe the practicing purpose, or maybe where people can even meditate for that matter in the virtual space. That was a really concept that I was trying to explore, if that is at all possible to have in the virtual world. And yeah, some renders from the exterior. And these were some of the spaces we were creating at different levels. And since again there wasn't any thought behind the scale, it is just like a game. You enter, you can just be any character, and then you just tend to explore the space. In yeah, that's it. Maybe Eric can just show around the video exe file.
All right.
Yep.
We guys can discuss as I try to move in, guys. All right. All good? Everybody on board? So I think someone's muted and is trying to talk.
Maybe Eric, if you can just take it to a little. Sorry.
Someone is muted and trying to talk.
I'm not sure. Yes. Is Joris and Sean here?
Joris, Sean, Zubin? Yeah.
Yeah, they're both muted. Yeah.
Yes.
I think starting conceptually, I think it's super interesting as an idea to start thinking about how architects are, I guess, some way we're taking the role of the video game designer, which I don't think is going to happen. I think the video game design industry is not gonna allow that to happen. But I think it's super interesting as a thought process of how we take. So I think right now there's esports is becoming like a huge, or it already is a huge industry. And I think these spaces that esports events are held in are very traditional, like sporting event or sporting stadiums. But I think it's super interesting if architects start to design the virtual spaces that also could host audiences as well. I think there could be something super interesting as how someone actually visits a virtual space to then see some sort of event, so some sort of video game event, whether it is like the example that you're showing, which would be some sort of Tekken-esque interaction that you can be involved with. Maybe there's some way that you can participate, not so much just to fight, but somehow be involved as an audience member. I think if you look at it from that perspective, I think it could be super interesting to see what kind of spaces the architect can design that it repositions the notion of the stadium that we're currently in, even when we're transitioning from something like football to an esports event, which I feel is very strange that these things are conducted in stadiums. It feels like such a random place to have such an event. Like I've seen some of these like Fortnite events that there's 5 or 6 people sitting playing computers in the middle of the room, and there's like hundreds of people around them, and you're like, it's such a weird, like that, surely that doesn't have the same kind of engagement as somehow being involved or actually feeling like you're in the space. So I think it's definitely an architectural problem that would be super interesting to explore.
Thanks, Sean.
To further talk upon what Sean was talking about, how would you go about interacting with this digital space? Is there some kind of a I mean, at the moment there's this problem about how would this virtual space communicate back to us, in a sense, like on our mobile phones when we receive a message or whatever, we have like this haptic response. I don't know, maybe in future works or future in future works we there's also a very nice train of thought of to discuss the way it communicates back to us, because imagine if you're like sitting in the stadium or whatever in a physical space, and then this translation to the digital, I think there are also a lot of problems that needs to be solved still.
Yeah, I agree. That was what I was trying to. Sorry, Subin.
Yes.
So that was exactly what I was trying to explore. So like just to add a bit more, for me, like for instance, since I was like into like if I just state a really primary example, I was into working out since quite a long time, and like in this lockdown, I realized if you don't tend to happen or like don't tend to experience a space, for instance, for a really long time, and if you're not outside your shell for a long time, you know, like the inspiration maybe like kind of goes. And what I was trying to resolve and find was how can you really get that through even like experiencing a space like that in virtual world. Like does it really help you by any chance? So like instead of like not just thinking about workspaces, like I mean obviously that's a part of our life, but then obviously what affects your mind has a really big impact as well. Is what I was trying to explore.
Yeah, because it looks like from the project that you did, you thought more like a level designer rather than an architect, right? Because you were more focused on what are these arenas in which you can actually play the game, less about how somebody would view it, but rather be a player. So in that sense, yeah, it's successful. It's just that perhaps your project would become a lot more richer if you ask some of the more difficult questions of viewership and who the audience is and what happens after the game is done. So I think it lacks more content because you limited yourself to that one question, right? So it's just about sort of asking these more difficult questions of viewership and things like that, which would really add a lot more value to the project as it is. And it would be a little bit more towards the direction of what an architect would think like. But like I said, this is, it was like you designed like a gamer, like you designed a level design much more than what an architect would design a thing to be.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree, but yeah, definitely, I agree too. It's just I think our discipline is in kind of a crisis in a way that we're trying to see what we can offer to the world, what more we can offer to the world as architects. And if your skills are kind of the same as a game level designer, then we don't have much to do. Like, it's better if we show what we can do as architects. And when it comes to I don't know, breaking domes and things like that, we're offering much more insight and artistic value rather than saying, hey, you know, especially if you're not gonna design something better than Tekken or Mortal Kombat, then it's not gonna make sense either.
Yeah. I think it's super important though that architects are starting to think about how games are actually designed, because the influence that the gaming industry has on our spatial conditions and our understanding of space is so important, especially now with like hundreds of millions of people playing Fortnite and Call of Duty and things like that. Like these games have become so much more important for us than quite a lot of traditional architectural spaces. So I think it's super important that both architects learn from the game designers, and somehow I think game designers can learn from architects, because they don't design, or level designers don't exactly design the same way we do. Like Susan was talking about, this notion of implementing the architectural, I guess, view of having an audience, thinking about, I know they're kind of boring ideas to think about because they sound traditionally architectural, but I think it's super important that when you're going about it, you pair them together so that then you can compare and contrast with what a traditional architect does versus what a game designer architect currently does, I guess, in the industry, and then thinking about how that actually is going to change the spaces that we're going to inhabit virtually. I think it's super interesting though.
Right.
Before Hanieh starts the presentation, I want to say greetings to all. It's our pleasure really to be here. And I want to thank Arek, Alex, and Ramsey for this amazing opportunity that gives us. And thank you, that's it.
Yeah, we appreciate all your efforts. We learned a lot, and at the same time, we enjoyed the whole process. So at first, we wanted to thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you should be able to share right now, Hanieh.
Yes.
Thanks for the kind words, guys.
So I'm Hanieh, and me and Sadra has designed the Rover. So actually, we had, I wanted to first mention that Rover comes from a TV series named The Prisoner in 1967, which is like a visual element, which is a big, huge white balloon. And it's working as the security system of the village in that TV series. So we have this hypothetical client who asked us to design this workspace for them. So I'm gonna present the idea. So the Rover, your omnipresent workplace in post-digital era. So our motto is put your mind in the maze, we eat your mind and you build your dream. So the company is a kind of dream maker. Rover is a virtual workspace, and the company has established a maze in which you are able to thrive your own radical ideas of brand new ways of living for the time being. So the aim is to, let's say, blossom your personal vision of the world, creating parallel worlds, utilizing your perspective on technology, politics, news, medias, societies, and so on. So Rover owners, like the client, is a group of intellectual dark web in Iran who want you to be the creator of your own worlds. So this is a kind of diagram which shows the organization. So the formal idea of the project comes from the elements of Persian garden, which is kind of a utopic idea. And we took some part of the plans and we tried to work with them to achieve this dystopic actually story. And these elements, we work with them and to achieve new combinations. So these are the cells. So the maze and these are the towers. So the maze is a context for you to achieve your wildest dream. Actually, you are the creator of the maze. The entrance key to the maze is big ideas. The levels of the maze are multi-directional, and the individual cells are the workplace you will be assigned to if you have a good idea. In the cells, we are providing you all the facilities and amenities required for your ideas, and in the public spaces in between. The public spaces in between, it is a place for you to share your thoughts and provoke debates. So we have some digital halls in the Rover, which are the places of all the ideas in the maze. So the company is watching over you in return. The halls are big data indicating that we have access to your mind. If you accomplish your dream, you will get the privilege of having access to GAI or the digital god. And
I'm so sorry for interruption, Hanieh. Your mic has so many noises.
Already?
Would you take care of that?
So you didn't hear me?
It had some noises.
No, I could
Now,
hear
We
now
heard
we're
you.
cool.
We heard you.
We heard you.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we also have, the company also have a device which means Mind Eater. So Mind Eater is your actually personal pod to join the Rover. And if you want, you can even connect your dreams to the Rover and to the device. And then you will continue working on your ideas when you're asleep. So I wanted to just add before we watch the video, I wanted to just add that this is a cautionary fiction story. So there is a good chance that you're already in the Rover. So you can go, Eric.
All right.
Eric?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah. So.
Meanwhile, can I put some words in addition to the... Okay. We all know that architecture is a cultural medium, and I want to emphasize the fact that instead of architectural ideas that we have worked on in this project, the scenario was so important for us because I think we in third nations such as Iran live in such maze. You know, these rings. I mean, this ring represents a virtual dump that poor people live in. And if you have a bright idea for the company Rover, you can work on it in these icosahedrons that you can see it up on the ring. And if your idea works properly and Rover wants your idea, you can be transported into the core in the center of this ring. And there is a place for some sort of privileged people who have immigrated from the dump to a better world. And in the center of this sphere, there's another sphere which is the place for the unknown intention who built this whole environment. And maybe the governors are there, and maybe some dark web intellectuals are there. We don't know nothing about them, but we can the clear thing that is they have made such platform.
Awesome.
I like to say there's actually a lot to unpack. You know, you've sort of made your own fictional world, and you've clearly laid down the rules of engagement and you know, how things work in this world that you've created. But I must also say that it seems to be very bureaucratic and capitalist in some nature. You know, you have a great idea, you get promoted, and you go up the economic ladder, and it also brings to mind a lot of questions to me. You know, because I've been thinking about what it means, what remote work means, and remote collaboration mean, and what, you know, how all this in the digital space entails. And your project, much more than anything, really brings surveillance to the forefront, right? It seems like your thoughts and your dreams per se are constantly being monitored, and you know, there are questions on labor, because it almost seems that it's demanded of you if you want to sort of progress and move forward and go to this nucleus in between. And it's far from utopic. You know, it's quite the opposite. In fact,
it's dystopic.
it's dystopic. Yeah, it is. It's very.
Actually, I think this is already happening, because if you, for example, consider Google, we have very close connection to Google. We put all our ideas, our taste and favorite things into it, and we don't have access to their big data. That was always my concern, that what would happen if Google said, okay, now we can rule the world. So we are kind of trying to bring up those issues with this project. So it's
and our intention was to criticize this matter.
Right. So, I mean, as a design project, there's always two stands you can take, right? You can either pick an interest that you have, and you can make a project which reinforces that very strongly, you know, or you can make the project which sort of reevaluates, our current zeitgeist and our, society as it is, and offer some sort of an alternative. Or you can completely throw that out of the window and, have a brand new design. So would you say yours is more sort of documenting what's happening right now and reinforcing that idea within the project?
Or exaggerating, maybe, because with exaggeration, you could actually go into your people's mind with stories. You can, stories have this powerful, power to provoke new thoughts, new ideas, and new criticism and stuff like that. That's why I think.
Or maybe we can say that we have accelerated the ruling idea in current world.
Yeah, that's true.
So it is in a way a sort of a magnification of what's happening right now, and we're trying to show an amplified version
of course.
Yes.
Of course. And I forgot one important thing, and that was about the workstation that you can see in this project. I mean those icosahedrons. The fact that we wanted to emphasize on is that in the near future, there is no need for us to be in a place. I mean, we can transpose our minds into a place, and the minds are working on some sort of labor,
Yeah, I can add something to that, because in Elon Musk interview, I think it was 2 months ago, he mentioned that in 10 years, they are working on mind simulation. And he mentioned that in 10 years, you won't need to talk. And it was like, mind-blowing for me, that your mind could get connected to each other without even talking. And we consider
Some
this
sort of telepathy and
yeah,
something like this.
So mind-blowing in a good or a bad way?
maybe scary a little bit, but
It is a two-sided blade. You can decide to kill a person with a knife or cut a fruit with it.
I also think
simultaneously good and bad.
It also reminds me of the idea that I saw in this recent TV series called Upload in Amazon Prime. Yeah. So it also is about taking the consciousness post-death, or even if someone's about to meet an accident, and then you upload it in a virtual space, and the consciousness will have their own lifestyles, and the real people also can keep interacting with that consciousness and have conversations together. And there's also so many levels of hierarchy that they establish in it. So you have like the elite payers who get to live in a very Victorian styled mansion with a lakeside view, etc. And then you have the 1 gigabyte users who only get 1 GB of data that with which they can operate their consciousness. Yeah. And you'll have character artists and designers and environment artists who keep trying to create a much professional versions for the high payers, and then they'll have a not so polished version for the low gigabyte users. Yeah.
And we think that this Rover project could be a new episode of the TV series called Black Mirror.
Well, the one thing I would love to add is that, for example, for the most of the time in before the humanist approach, architects have been visualizing what's invisible for many people in power, right? So you have the pyramids and the palaces and the churches that always and the religious buildings and the temples that always somehow make it into a physical or visualize what's invisible. So they were kind of translators for a long time, right? Before they started taking the humanist approach and started building social housing and everything, right? And this approach to visualizing something that's invisible in real life and started visualizing in VR is a very unique approach in a way that now we're starting to visualize things in VR. The reason I think it's very unique is because for the most time we've been visualizing for the people in power. Now this is kind of visualizing for the people who are having problems, and it's giving us a voice and democratizing the visualization or the translation process. And that's why it's really, really interesting for me. Because the high payers were those guys and we were working for them as architects for a long time. And now we're like, I have this idea and during a workshop, I'm just gonna let it out and it be there, right? So for me, it's a good thing that as architecture is, VR is giving that option to architects that we don't have to build using so much budget to express our ideas.
Exactly.
And now we are, and it's really nice that you've taken that opportunity.
That's why VR and AR are game-changing, I guess.
Absolutely. And that also brings to this interesting question of even the whole idea of having power or status or the stature, or even in terms of fashion or many of the social elements that we engage with, the commodities. When you virtualize them, I think the ball game brings creators on a much more larger upper pedestal, and then it's not about the purchasing power, but the creators hold a more larger control in the way you can create or curate and craft the experiences or spaces.
Indeed.
Yeah. And we are only limited by probably the poly count or the mesh count, and that becomes the asset or commodity. And
soon, I guess we won't be, right? I mean, that's the main difference between a design fiction workshop and a design workshop. When design fiction doesn't care about the polygons and doesn't design everything to the fit, but it's all about expressing ideas and thinking ahead, that you're like 50 years ahead what do you do now, right? Like instead of thinking like of what's possible and everything. So
yeah,
great job, guys. Sean, do you want to add anything by any chance?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, this notion that you're basically three-dimensionalizing something that's already hidden. So this notion of Google controlling this huge amount of data, and as you progress through these stages in your life, or stages in up the ladder essentially of your profession, you're kind of three-dimensionalizing that and taking do you know the panopticon? It's this disciplinary method that's used in prisons actually, where the prison guard can stand in the center of the space and basically see, I guess, only one half of the whole room, but the idea is that he can see, or she can see, the whole selection of prisoners. And there's this really, I think it's quite funny in that's kind of the system that you've set up, but then it looks like in the center of the space, it's kind of hidden, you know, there's like another layer of like this kind of black orb that you can't like penetrate, so you don't know who's actually watching you. And I think it's a super interesting three-dimensionalization of what's happening on things like Facebook and Google, that are constantly consuming our data without us actually being present. And I think one thing that, just from most cautionary tales, I think it's super important that they are cautionary, and they point to things that exist today, so that people are like, oh shit, that's actually happening, you know. And it's this realization that people have, where they start to rethink of the way that they're using their own mobile phones, and the way that they're putting on specific amount of data onto things like Facebook and all these other social media platforms. And I think that's one thing that cautionary or near future scenarios can really help with within culture anyway. I think it's super interesting. Good job, guys.
Thank you for your all kind compliments.
Hello everyone. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Eric and Vamshi for this amazing opportunity. For all three of us, I think the whole concept of VR was completely new, and this whole experiment and this 1-week workshop kind of opened our minds to different paradigms. So we kind of approached the project in a little different way, but at the same time, we thought how a workspace is like. It's a very in some sense a very banal topic, like very modular in nature. So how would we address a workspace and how would we look at it? So in that sense, we thought if we are catering this particular workspace to Hyperloop, how would it be? So so that's where this whole concept of Hyperloop Research Center came into picture, and we kind of picked up on the whole important abstract ideas of what Hyperloop is. Like whenever we talk about Hyperloop, it's always about speed and pods, and how can these be like workspaces? Like how can kind of speed and pods be used in a workspace? Like can pods become a singular workspace, and speed can be more like an experiential way? And also we thought how would they collaborate? That's equally important. Like pod could be singular, but at the same time, when it comes together, it has to function much more intrigue way. So we kind of addressed how a laboratory and arena could work. So these are a couple of functions that we picked from the Hyperloop and what Hyperloop might require. So this is the diagram that we evolved. So basically it's a loop. So we evolved through a series of modulations, and we kind of got this loop, and there is this pod that kind of moves from one place to another, and this kind of forms a geometry which is volumetric, spatial, and when one pod moves to a different place, the kind of experience that one gets, probably spatially, visually, environmentally, so it'll be completely different. It won't be the same experience. So how would a single pod be so different? And that's something that we try to address in this project. and we, after evolving this geometry, we had to look at certain spaces like, for example, a small office pod or a singular pod. Where will they actually meet, like to have a conference? Invariably in workspaces, that's more important. How do we collaborate? Like, so we created certain volumes where that collaboration could take place, but at the same time, it's to do with movement as well. Yeah. So this is a kind of a render that we came about, like how do we address like certain way, like it's more like an anti-gravity abstract way that we looked at, and during nighttime all these lines become like direction and points. So again, picking up on certain elements of hyperloop, like those lines being so effective, and it gives a sense of direction plus visual narrative. And this is one of the interior spaces. So this interior space kind of has a different aesthetic, and there's no similarity in any interior space because of the kind of lighting, the kind of ambience that's being created. And every space would have its own visual effect and aesthetic. And these are the overall modulations. We couldn't realistically render it, but the way that we looked at geometry, I think, was kind of meticulously we tried to address it.
Thank you.
These are some of the, hello? Okay, yeah, these are some of the modulations and that we came about. So so yeah, I mean, like, that's it. Arek, can you please, yeah, you can flip one after the other. So this is the loop and how the working part and the overall composition that we try to do. Yeah, like, yeah, I mean, like, yeah, anyone can kind of.
The research center we are exploring as for the people who are actually working, it's a digital workspace for them, as well as for curious people who want to just visit the place and understand how it's functioning. It will be like a place where there are no attributes of the physical world. Like, you could choose the gravity mode or anti-gravity, or you can fly through the objects, or you could also be in the pods and control its speed. In the daytime, there are these light and shadow happening because of all these different materials. So each space is creating a dynamic spatial experience. But in the night time, there is this fascinating illumination happening with the pods and the other surfaces like the blobs. This will make it full of energy and give it kind of a adrenaline rush kind of experience if someone wants to have that. The speed of the pods could also add if someone is interested in that experience.
So more like looking at transport and trying to address how movement and pod system works, and individually as well as when it comes together, how it kind of forms plurality and tries to address several other functions. So yeah.
There are these bits of information that are floating around in the building. They can tell about how many people are currently using the space, or it could be data like it could randomly say 27 GB of data being transferred, or like there are 32 pods which are vacant. You could choose any.
You're muted. Saurabh, you're muted. So yeah, I mean,
there could be interesting pieces of information in the building which will guide the people about the facts and how much the building is occupied. Or people can also encounter each other with chance and have a collaborative work with each other. And if someone needs isolation, they always have those pods or units where they can function. So that's the whole idea.
Thank you, guys.
Arek, can you keep one of those renders? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, this is
What I find most interesting about your project is the fact that essentially your project is an architecture which is sort of infrastructural, basically, you know. So you've sort of converted this infrastructural network and sort of expanded that and made it a shell, which then becomes the architecture, right? So it's also the first example that we've seen today where the pods and the workspaces are actually dynamic, and you can quite literally see the, you know, the paths that they take, and that's been sort of expressed itself as the architecture itself. I mean, I could even sort of see this as a plug-in pod which could attach itself to already existing infrastructures around the world, like highway systems or transportation systems and things like that. So in that sense, it certainly has a very strong aesthetic attitude, because you know, it sort of reflects on the facade and on the surface data from the pods itself, and that's very clearly sort of reflected on the surface with, you know, the markings of the speed. It has its own, you know, heads of display, so like quality, where it shows you all the data that's being transferred and the speeds of the pods and stuff. In some sense, it's very coherent in its aesthetic attitude and in the way that you've designed and the way it's been represented. I think it's successful in that sense.
I also think, as Sean, you wanted to go?
No, you can go.
Yeah, I also really think that taking, as Zubin said, taking that sort of a real mechanism or a real machine, this whole network, infrastructure network, and then, you know, it's one of those very few projects that you can actually see like a translation. And I think it's quite successful as a translation in virtual reality, because, yeah, you know, firstly, we also had a couple of conversations when we were discussing, and it had this very thin line where it could have ended up being like a simulation or a representation of your real transportation network in VR. But then you sort of changed the vibe of it and changed the game differently. And then you try to create these mobile work pods where you can facilitate new forms of interaction that wouldn't happen otherwise. And in reality, if you were to create this sort of a physical infrastructure, it probably takes a lot of, I don't know, it's too complex and it's too intensive to like use a physical infra to create something like this. But rather, as taking a medium like VR, I think this works really well and quite cohesively. And there are so many variables that you could play with. Then it's almost as good as a prototype that you could actually readily go in the market and pitch to some of the developers.
Yeah, I mean, also, sorry.
Yeah, go on.
No, like I completely agree. Also, like whenever we talk about technology, whenever we talk about something that's advanced, we always refer to companies like Google, Facebook, but there are other tech companies, and we thought, okay, why don't we pick something that's happening in transportation sector like Hyperloop, which is the next big thing, and why don't we look at architecture? Like architecture is also like the next big thing, like VR, and try to integrate that. So in some way, that's what we try to kind of do. And yeah, and also we also try to create some very intricate spaces, but unfortunately the file is not opening. I'm extremely sorry for that. But that's the nature that we try to evolve. Like every workspace should be different, but it is completely unique by itself. Like each time they move, they experience it differently. They want to experience the same thing. And when they meet, it's going to be a completely different aesthetic plus function. So that's something that we try to address. And yeah, I'm extremely sorry for interrupting. Yeah.
You managed to add minions though.
Yeah.
As your avatars. And some dogs.
That's cool.
Mohammad would have noticed that.
Pretty funny. All right.
Don, would you like to comment something on this?
Yeah, well, I guess for me, I'm curious as to whether you saw it as a single operation or as a series. So like, would you envision it to have all of these connected pods starting to reconfigure? So instead of just seeing one of them as one, it feels like it's a singular aggregate, but you could have hundreds or thousands of these like starting to aggregate with like different connections. So not so much just like plugging them in, but rather how do they stack on each other? How do they sprawl across like a huge amount of land, or whether it goes vertical? And I think that could be a super interesting exercise to start to look at the aggregation and start to connect. So it has like these like, I guess, the openings. So I think if you took the openings that are the same and starting to try and piece them together, and then starting to see how that actually grows, I think it could be super interesting to see how these pods start to aggregate over. Because like, I think when I think of pods, I think of like Peter Cook and the 1960s archigram and things like that. But I think visually it's completely different. So, and there was all about slotting something into a space. But I think it could be interesting to see how these things start to aggregate and make a much larger conglomerate of parts. I guess could be super interesting. I think.
While working, there were a lot. We had a lot of possibilities, which we were thinking, and we had to limit ourselves and just stick to this. But we had thought about the additions which could happen, the modularity, or like how it could function with different geometries joining.
Yeah, I think it could be something quite interesting because you're using, or it appears that the geometry that it extends from or it comes from is like simple primitives. Like it looks like cubes and elongated cuboids and things like that. And I think it would be interesting to think of how those start to aggregate beyond from the original piece that you have, not so much going back to the beginning and then, because I'm not sure, I'm thinking about how I would have made the model or made the 3D, and I'm thinking I would have aggregated cubes to begin with, then like taking their edges and things like that. But then I'm thinking not start from the beginning, but rather take what you've got as one component rather than a series of 100 components as like little pods as it is. So that makes sense. But then use that big pod as like a single pod, and then you aggregate more and more. I think it could be quite interesting to see this pod thing grow and take over the world, like an alternative to like Super Studio, I guess.
I think you could figure out the way we worked on it.
Yeah.
It's precisely the way you imagined it to happen.
I think it's cool though. It's really nice. Good stuff, guys.
I would love to add something like very briefly on this. I would love to share my screen for this. Like, I mean, first off, it's very metabolist in a way. Like the way you have a core and you keep adding elements on it and aggregating things on it. And I don't know if you've seen the Dutch Design Week MVRDV installation. Basically, it was the notion that there was all of these cubes that interlinked to one another, and each of the neighbors would fight over or negotiate, let's say, over their spaces. So one would actually like negotiate with the other that I need this space for today, and this, I don't know, this space would move down and give space to the other neighbor. So the thing is, like, I don't know why we would have that kind of negotiations happening in VR, because you're creating all of these spaces that are right next to one another, and all of the workers would see each other and start negotiating that I need this space. And when in VR, you don't actually need that negotiation at all. All of these elements could have been far from one another and still make sense and still work, because you could travel in VR and still have the space. So you're creating a problem of having a square foot area or a square meter area in VR, which is really interesting in a way as well. It's kind of a constraint to have in VR, but also it's kind of unnecessary. And maybe that's how you monetize this space. Maybe you make people pay extra for having extra space from the other space or something, and that could be a business model on its own. But it's basically creating a problem, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I would say that that's a good thing. I think from the perspective of starting to lay down architectural rules for the virtual space, I think it's something that's come up quite a lot in the conversations, which I think is super interesting. As the architects of virtual spaces, we have that ability to then design what type of tools or accessible modes of movement and things like that we can actually provide. Similar to Vamsi had mentioned, like video games, and one thing that I got from him was it's super interesting, this idea that video games give you a set amount of tools and you can only use what you're given. But the thing that makes it exciting or like interesting for you to play the game is that you only have those certain tools. So I don't know, I was having a discussion the other day, and just anecdotally, a lot of people that are playing things like Minecraft or Fortnite that are like building games, and it's super easy to escape something by building. That idea of like, why can't I just build something in, for instance, Call of Duty, where you're not given that ability, becomes somewhat frustrating because there's certain limitations that are put in play. And I think that's super. I think that's part of the, for me anyway, that's part of the architectural implementation within virtual space, is providing these rules or criteria that we can engage with. I think it's super interesting.
And also a challenge like what Eric mentioned was like the whole idea of what is private, what is public. Mm-hmm. That was probably like in some sense probably the toughest part in our project, which is like, how do I mean the word negotiation, yeah, how do we look at that? And that's where we really felt movement is something that we can really attribute and use as something like a plus point, and those visual sense, and try to implement like a new environment each time you move. But yeah, coming to like what Eric said, yeah, it does have certain spaces where there will be a conflict, but at the same time, I believe that conflict will lead to conversations and interactions, which invariably won't happen in a normal workspace. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's what I think.
Those things are inevitable. I mean, digitally commoditizing is already happening. Digital properties and digital assets are already being like negotiated.
Exactly. Like I think designers of the workspace, or like at least the clients, would want to create like artificially induced problems for the customers, so to say, so that they could later fix it for them but getting paid. Which is
that's exactly
which is messed up in a way, but that's kind of inevitable with capitalism as well.
Yeah. But I think that example you gave from MVRDV is really, really good. I think it's definitely worth going checking out that video. The video of all the parts moving, it's super nice.
Definitely worth checking out, guys. It's very. That's kind of making the digital go to the physical in a way.
Yeah.
Instead of the. All right. Talking about money, our next and final project is a bank, actually. It's a virtual bank, and it's really interesting. It's by Harish and Stefan.
Okay, so first of all, we would like to sincerely thank both Eric and Vamsi for pulling off such a great workshop, and that too, we managed to create a really good project in just a span of a week. So sincerest thanks to you both. Our project is about a virtual bank. We call it the Fortune Piazza. So going on to the next slide, please. Okay, so virtual reality, I feel, is a medium which offers a very whole new set of possibilities and a multitude of ways to experience a single design intervention. It is possible to create environments and even build worlds, which gives users very wholesome experiences. With this in mind, our design aims to go beyond the traditional requirements of workspaces. So what we thought of integrating into this was making users feel social as well. So we thought of focusing on the social needs of VR users so that it would ultimately create a space where they could come together and interact besides just the workspace itself. So to the next slide. We take inspiration from entire economies existing in VR and the developing shift toward digital and cashless transactions. We envision Fortune Piazza. It is a place to come together and interact within the context of a workspace, a virtual banking environment that also functions as a hub for professionals and clients of the banking service. So this is an animated one. We could probably show this or what, Stefan?
No, we can continue with the picture as well.
Okay, so sure. This speculative design challenges the notion of money being a thing of the past. And it also strives to provide a utopian setting wherein it shows a future for decentralized banking and finance, making it accessible for everyone. The form and elements that are used to create the design intervention here are an echoing memory of the power and stability traditional banks portrayed and create a novel articulation out of the same. And thus we want to make sure that money is from now on seen as a digital, ethereal and fluidic entity. Banks are further reimagined as places for visualization and conversation about economies that is about both digital, pertaining to the cryptocurrencies, and physical, catering to both the user groups. The bank workspace that we envision aims to flatten prevalent hierarchies in such workspace environments, making the expression further decentralized and accessible. The space is designed to rather function like an airport, for instance, a place for traffic, transactions, exchange, seals, and deals. To the next slides.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the visual expression that we try to portray here brings about a sense of contrast. On the one side is a very futuristic, highly post-digital and discrete structure that shelters the banking workspaces of the employees, whilst on the other side we have a utopic expression of a golden scaffolding made out of classical ionic columns, which obviously signify wealth and power that since the Greek and Roman times are used to signify power and stability. The scaffolding kind of also extends over the banking spaces, thus providing continuity and harmony to the environment. So to the next slides.
Yeah. I think I made a mistake. Yeah.
Okay, so the uniting factor of all the elements is a central plaza, which serves as the primary node for gathering and interaction. The plaza also houses a massive spherical screen, which you see here, which directly responds to real-world economic situations that are capable of changing their form and scale to match financial growths and losses. So primarily what we wanted to envision here was a form, an architecture that ultimately responds to data. This is primarily based on real-world economic statistics, stock markets, and financial conditions, which would inform the form, essentially the central space, the central gathering node, which would probably be as an indicator as to how real-world economies and finances are playing around. So we go to the video then.
Yeah, I will stop sharing my screen. Arek, can you put the video, please?
Yeah. Let me play it. I found it. We have two videos. Which one do you want to?
So the one with the name presentation inside.
Let me see. This one or?
No, not this one. I think it's in a zip. Yeah, in 14 Piazza video.
Yeah.
There's a folder, 14 videos. Do you have it? It's not there?
Oh yeah, it's here.
Okay.
Stefan, you want to go about the circulation, wayfinding, and all that?
Wait. Well, yes, I will just show my screen again.
I can go through the exa if you want, guys.
Oh yeah. That would be perfect actually. So actually, I will just talk a little bit more with the exe file. So yeah, so what we wanted to do is like having two types of locomotion. So people can walk, of course, but also the space is made big enough for people to be able to fly as well. And that was very important for us because we didn't want to have some kind of limitation, the same kind of limitation as the one that we can have in a physical world. That's why we have a lot of scaffolding and people in the air. And also, we thought that the glitched architecture, which is more linked to the cryptocurrencies and the digital money, would also be a kind of hive for people to shelter, but also work together or discuss. And basically, the whole architecture is a workspace actually. And of course, we saw in the video that we also have some secret space where people can actually talk about private sensible matter, which is not linked to which can be sensible for privacy. And you can see also in the air that the moment in the video was a bit fast, but you also have some gates, for instance, and those gates are linked. One of these gates are linked to currencies. And when you have some people who are on these gates, they can access some workspaces and some environment that are linked to these currencies. And for now we have some kind of currencies, but in the ideal let's say world, it would be a hub for any kind of currencies. So we really want to make it more diverse. And maybe also another point is to embed other type of not only classical Roman classical let's say archetype about money, but also involves other type of elements from different cultures.
So ultimately, the environment does not limit itself to a workspace alone. It also creates a social hub, a hive, or a place of bustling activity wherein people could not only get their work done, but also act as a central node of gathering and interaction. So Fortune Piazza integrates and delivers the activity of banking and finance into a more people-oriented social activity that brings together the citizens of virtual reality to a common ground. So that's about it.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Okay, maybe I'll start. I guess first of all, like I like it a lot. I think it's really cool. I think I really like this notion of using this Greek archetype of the column and kind of turning it on its head. I think it's quite funny as well, this idea that you're referring to it as the scaffolding. But obviously we're in virtual reality or in virtual space. There's no need for a scaffolding, but I think that's quite interesting to use these columns and to use them in the wrong way as well, to use them horizontally and upside down and things like that. And I think that's super fun. I think to take that even further, I think would be super interesting, because instead of having so much just the flat open space that you have, I think some of the interesting spaces that come out of it are in these like kind of nooks and crannies of the spaces that are made from I'm not sure what the extruded white geometry is, but I think some of that creates super interesting spaces alongside these columns that are used like completely incorrectly as an architect, you know. And I think that's super interesting, the way like to reformat what they're supposed to be, because in the virtual space they're completely unnecessary. We don't need columns, and I think that's super fun to begin with.
Yeah, I think your project is rather successful, you know, for what sort of programmatic problem that you've set this project to be. I mean, this sort of reminds me of an old Hani Rashid project, which is
I was gonna say the same thing.
Yeah, which this architect from New York who designed a virtual New York stock exchange, you know, where he did this. It was on a website where it was this environment that he made, which he tried to explain the complexities of banking and, you know, monetary transactions through, you know, by superimposing news articles about banking, about the stock exchange values, and, you know, all of that. But I think where your project is really successful is you try to explain the complexities of all of that, but at the same time it has a satirical or ironic quality to it. You know, it's supposed to be funny. And I think that's where architecture fails largely these days, because they try to be a little too serious about what they do. And, you know, in art, for example, there are so many examples of comical, satirical, ironic examples. You can check out work by this artist called Merit Oppenheimer, where she makes like plates and glasses and daily objects with strange materials like animal parts and fur and things like that, you know. So it's great to see that sort of a quality in architecture, and I think virtual reality really allows you to push that aspect much more further. I love the fact that, you know, you have golden ionic columns used in ways it's not supposed to be used, you know, that in close opposition to these deconstructed architecture bits. And I also love the fact that you've specifically identified which subgroup that you're targeting. You know, whenever you make environments like this, that's the first thing to know is what is this audience that you are targeting at, and then you can sort of engage with a lot of the rules and sort of break those rules also that, you know, they're very used to. So I think that's very important even before you start a project sometimes, is for you to identify what these issues are that you need to address and reevaluate in the first place. And then, you know, you can build your own culture and rewrite the rules of existing culture. Then you can go about sort of branding it and monetizing things and, you know, writing down your own rule set. I think, yeah, that's what I really like the most about your project, is that it sort of highlights the embedded irony in banking and the value of money and things like that. That's really sort of shines through of how you sort of this aesthetic attitude you have about representing your project in the first place.
Thanks.
Yeah.
If I may add something really small on that, like I remember I was working with one of my mentors on one of my diplomas. I don't know why we got to that topic, but we were talking that there's no comedic architecture anywhere. Like I'm talking about the build stuff, right? I don't know if there's like, prove me wrong if you can, please. Like, but like, I don't see any architecture that makes you laugh. You know, you have art that makes you laugh. You have movies that make you laugh. You have so many things. Like in every little thing, there's so many things that can make you laugh. But in architecture, we've become such a serious thing, such a serious discipline that it's almost not professional to laugh in a way. And it's really successful to make someone, even if with an ironic way that you've done it, it's really fun to make someone laugh and go like, oh my God, these are ionic columns and he's just making fun of these guys, right? The whole money structure, right? And we were talking about this during our brainstorming, and what I believe is the main value from our workshop is that the talks and not the tools and ZBrush and all that. But like, so when we were talking about this, we were like, why would we have columns based on what we had? Like, things are in banking are going all towards cryptocurrency and on traceability and democratization, and all of these are about power and showing off power. And in a way, you've managed to break that and say, like, this is not that important anymore. This is the past, and all of the chaos that was going on in your model also depicted that crumbling down in a way too. I don't know if you've done it on purpose, but it's very kind of fun to do that. Like do a bank, but say money is not important in a way. Like it's a good notion. I don't know. It's fun.
I have a quick question for you guys. Did you guys intentionally make it satirical or ironic, or was it an after effect of the project?
Well, I think you can go, Harish. You can.
Yeah.
Okay, so primarily we like the aesthetic as to how we put together columns as a scaffolding, and then we just played around with it, and then it kind of striked as to, because they no longer have to signify power or stability anymore, because it's just dominating, and then one set of people just hold everything and the rest do not have anything at all. So we kind of had this notion of challenging it a little perhaps. So that is where we just multiplied the amount of scaffolding we just added there.
And it came along the way. And then we chose the path, and I think that was quite obvious that it is gonna end like this.
Also,
but,
like
spiritually speaking, I see this project more like a successor to what Hanieh and Sadra tried to showcase and unpack to us. Because as Eric also previously mentioned, with the rise of democratization and blockchain and smart contracts and stuff like that, this whole power is destabilized, and there could be more. We could see rise of more of these platforms. If I could envision a sort of a more comical blockchain platform where you can actually engage with different users from different parts of the world, and you can have your own encrypted bubble where you can have your contract conversations or your financial transactions, and you can also have these social hubs and spaces that could evolve and emerge. It has a lot of potential that way too.
Indeed. That could be a good path for this project to evolve as well. Thanks for the feedback.
Also, I love that. I don't know. We discussed this in the workshop, but somehow you conveyed the idea to Subin or someone who's just watching it and hasn't been working with you for a while, that you've designed this for a specific audience. That's such a successful thing that someone who's not been working with you to realize that in a way, right?
Absolutely.
So because this is when you think about it, someone who's a traditional banker who works with cash money or credit wouldn't come here to bank, right? The people who would come here to bank would be the crypto guys, so to say. It's made for them, and they are the ones making fun of that the old banking system that everyone had, right? Because they used to have gold to back dollar and everything, and now they don't have anything. And the main thing the crypto guys are saying is that, well, the governments come to them and say like, hey, you have nothing to back your money's value. And they go like, hey, you haven't been having anything to back your money with since the 60s and 70s. So, and now with the cryptocurrency is already a big, it's making fun of the whole banking system already and the money system already. And to have that philosophy embedded in your design in the virtual world is such a good thing to do. Like, that's what makes your project a success for me. Like, both symbolically and functionally, it's I can see it to be a place that would work.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Good job, guys.
Yeah.
Great.
All right. If nobody has anything to add, we're done with all of the projects, guys. We made it. It's the final part of the. Yeah, if I could clap with one hand, I would, but basically, good job, everyone. And thank you to all the jury who just dropped by and gave your time to us, guys. I mean, you've been so patient to discuss all of the projects one by one. And I hope it was interesting for you as well. It's been a great journey this past week. First off, because of what we managed to do as a workshop, because usually what we do online is just teaching tools, and it's very hard to convey culture and make discussions that would happen online, but somehow I would love to believe that we managed to do it in a way. And
absolutely.
And that was really nice. And also to do projects online as a studio with people that we haven't been interacting with ever. It's also really nice that we made this online studio happen in a way, right? We did projects for the first time, and we weren't sure how this would work out when we started it. But when me and Vamsi got together in the beginning to start something, we had this idea of just making online workshops a simulation or a replica of the real workshops, rather than just covering tools or software and being about just how to use the tools, right? So I hope we managed to give you something, and this will help you in your career in a way. And I just want to thank you one more time for all the effort you've put in. I know some of you haven't been sleeping for the past 1 or 2 days. So we really appreciate that. And I hope it was fruitful.
Really commendable work, guys. I mean, to pull all of this in a week, and with the technical glitches, and to sort of craft a narrative and work as a team. I mean, it's a lot to do for a week, and it's some amazing work. I mean, I think you should sort of take this work forward, and you don't have to stop now. Even though the workshop's over, you should continue developing it until where you see fit. Fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks.
You really added to the value of the workshop with your input, Subin. And Sean too, and everyone who stopped by and who couldn't stay for longer. Like, thank you so much. And hope we can stay in touch, and you would stop by again anytime, sometime later.
Yeah.
And please call us too. We would love to stop by to your workshops. Would be really nice.
Awesome.
I think the work has been fantastic. Like, really impressive stuff for what, 7 days. It's really great.
2 days for the projects. The first 4 days have been basically tooling, and the 2 days have been for the projects, and the 7th day is this actually. We're discussing. It's like the final presentations.
Yeah, no, it's really, really great stuff. Like really impressive. So yeah, big congrats to all of you guys finishing all the work.
Thank you for stopping by. It really means a lot coming from you guys.
Thanks a lot for having me.
If you, we're gonna send a link to you guys as well. If you've not been following, I love Blob. I heart blobs, right? Please do. It's really nice. What I love about I heart blobs is that they don't only show abstract forms. I've learned a lot by just reading their descriptions under the posts they do. Like the narratives they make on even the simpler forms is really good for you to learn how to read forms and the digital aspect of things, and it really pushes things forward. And it's been really great. Like you should really follow them. It's really nice.
And they released their first book a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
Released their first book.
That's super fun.
Yeah.
All right. I guess we're at the end of it, guys. In a real workshop, we would go out and party and drink, but I guess that's the only part where we haven't figured out how to do on an online workshop. Yeah. Everybody's writing a lot of virtual kebabs and virtual pizza.
Kebabs, yeah.
Pizzas, pizza. You promised us a pizza.
Right. All right, guys. I'm just gonna go mute, and I guess this is the end of it, right?
Yep.
Wow.
Do you guys like want to
So
have
sad.
a small
Simultaneous.
It's been a quick week, super quick week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm simultaneously so excited and happy and
Exhausted at the same time.
Same time. I'm so sad that I'm not able to see you soon. This was a very fantastic journey for me. Thanks for everything.
Sadra, I have to say you're the most polite person I've ever met in my life.
Yeah, Sadra, you've been the most kind and polite.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Thank you.
Such a role model for kindness.
Yeah.
Even in the physical world, it's like that.
The world needs more Sadra.
So you need to visit the dark side of me.
No. So scary.
Actually, among all of you guys, I really miss Kuba.
Right.
I really miss this guy.
Who said that?
Yeah. I said that, Mohammad.
Guys, I'm gonna stop the recording before it gets weird, but we're gonna keep the chat open in case.
By the way,
Stop the recording and Sadra, take us to your basement.
Yeah. I'm gonna prepare stuff.
That's his dark side. Preparing muffins is his dark side, basically. Like, that's how dark it can be.
Of course it is.
Who's doing the photo though?
I'm recording it, so we'll take snips from it.
This is super funny. Well, I'll snip anyways. Just one more, guys. All right. Awesome, done. Awesome, guys.
Yeah.